able to actually say, this is what a kaitiaki interest is, this is how it's been applied. So they're trying to ramp up the legal understanding of how you apply treaty principles. For the Wildlife Act, which currently gives Crown ownership over all of our endangered species, the Tribunal is recommending that that Act be closed off, and that and made more specific to say that in fact the Crown doesn't own endangered species. Māori, in fact no one owns endangered species. But Māori and Crown should work together to see how we can manage. So not quite a commons approach, but they're trying to sort of chip away at the Crown sort of behaviour of always trying to claim ownership over things. That's the only act where the Tribunal comes straight out and says, no, you don't. And then they've also made comments to DOC about their decisions to allow bioprospecting by foreign companies in the conservation estate, and we all know what happened last year when the government decided they wanted to open up our conservation estate to mining interests. It's still on the back burner, but the Tribunal said, well, no, it's not up to you. You're actually a guardian on behalf of all of New Zealand, but Māori have interests there and you need to consult with Māori. So there are things in this report that, even though it doesn't talk about ownership, it really does try and promote a sense of a better partnership. So they look at changes to the Resource Management Act to enhance the role of iwi resource management. They say that the Resource Management Act has failed in their implementation of the sections relevant to the treaty, and that things really need to change drastically. Another chapter is on Tonga and the conservation estate. And this was my favourite chapter to read, I have to say, so you get more slides on this, because this is my passion. So for the conservation estate, the Tribunal reinforces that it's not just about land, and it's not just about landscapes and ecosystems and species. It's that within this land is mātauranga, it's knowledge, and that much of this land is actually the key to the identity of Māori. So being removed from it and not being able to access it has had a huge damage on Māori cultural identity and knowledge. This map, for those not familiar, if you can see these little brown spots, can you see them? They're so tiny. That's all that's left in Māori collective ownership of the entire landmass of New Zealand, less than 4%. So for those who think the treaty settlements process is a gravy train, Māori are out there getting things and grabbing things back, that's not the case at all. If you really unpack treaty settlements, you'll see that everything other than land is given to Māori. So through the process, we've actually lost more land rather than gained. So that's all that's left in Māori collective ownership, compared to 33% of the landmass of New Zealand held in the conservation estate. There's a global target set by the Convention on Biological Diversity for the world to try and reach 13% of land in conservation. And here we are in New Zealand, 33%. We're one of 3 countries in the world to have such a high percentage. The other 2 are Switzerland because of the entire Alps and Costa Rica because of the rainforest. But it's not just about the percentage, though, of the landmass. It's how we categorise, or how government categorises our conservation estate. There are 6 categories that go from Category 1, which is hands-off, no one touches it, to Category 6, which allows for sustainable use and continued human occupation within or community occupation within a conservation estate. And in countries like England, the majority of their conservation estate is in Category 6. In New Zealand, the majority of ours is in Category 1. So it's not just about 33% in conservation, it's 33% in conservation with hands off, no access, very limited access. Now, the whole theory behind having all these conservation estates is that you're supposed to use it for the nation to be able to regulate recreational use. But the key message is around biodiversity, that presumably by having all this conservation estate, we can afford better protection to our native species. But when you look at our statistics, the system isn't working. All of our native frogs are threatened. 5 out of our 6 bats are endangered. 2,420 species are threatened, according to the IUCN Red List that comes out every year. 180 species on the brink of extinction. This extinction and this endangerment of species isn't happening out there in the other land. It's actually happening inside the conservation estate. And this outcome is actually quite consistent with what the rest of the world is finding out. It's where the research is heading, that the best conservation outcomes actually come from communities living alongside, having a vested interest and caring for the resources and land around them. And you get less conservation outcomes when you have this nature without people approach, because you remove people from having any connection to that land or to those species. So those are sort of sobering messages for how we deal with the whole conservation estate. And so the tribunal is really saying to DOC in particular, got to change the way you think, got to think more about the taonga species and less about the power around the control of it, and come up with better measures to protect the taonga. So if you can't do it well, give the job to someone else. And I just wanted to share that Tongariro, our wonderful national park, you know, it's the first national park anywhere in the world that was gifted by an Indigenous peoples. So it isn't a question of Māori always taking and Māori always wanting back. We've been leaders in sharing for a long, long time. Tongariro in 1993 also became the first property under the UNESCO system to be listed for both its cultural values as well as its natural values. It blazed the trail for what are now 23 sites in the World Heritage dual status. Now moving on to when the Crown controls Mātauranga Māori. So this one, the tribunal describes the relationship in detail with all of the Crown agencies, from Te Papa through to broadcasting, archives, the library, all of the collections that are held by these institutions, and says that these in many cases are actually the best sources of mātauranga available in the country. They're very important collections. And as such, the Crown is actually acting as a kaitiaki, whether it realises it or not. For the works held by the Crown, the tribunal comes up with these two elements: a kaitiaki relationship with taonga that are sold or willingly transferred. And then there's a whole series of actions as to how you implement, a kaitiaki relationship. But then the tribunal also talks about a rangatiratanga relationship, which is when taonga have been lost or wrongly taken or newly discovered. And for a rangatiratanga relationship, it's a very different series of actions that need to happen. But the tribunal says that the issue of access is one where they've disagreed with the claimants, because they've said that there are wider issues around being able to access for public research purposes, for educational purposes. So the tribunal didn't think it was wise to get into agreements around access. What they did say, though, is that we needed more discussions around the use of knowledge. But access, they came very strongly in favour of open access to the public. But then they make some qualifications in this. So material held in Crown archives and libraries, which includes large amounts of mātauranga Māori, sort of regardless of how it came into the Crown's possession, that Māori have a strong treaty-based interest. So whether it's kaitiaki or rangatiratanga, Māori have a strong interest in all mātauranga held by the Crown. Nevertheless, it's important for important reasons to maintain relatively free public access, and especially Māori public access. So not in favour at all of trying to develop exclusions. They recommend management through an objection-based approach, being able to access private research, material for private research, and it should be free. But that users that plan to exploit for commercial gain need to seek permission, or at least consult with kaitiaki. And in terms of balancing interests of others, the tribunal says that no other interests can override the unextinguished rangatiratanga interest in taonga that have been wrongfully acquired. Talks also about some of the legislation specific to mātauranga Māori and Crown ownership, in particular the Antiquities Act, where they use the term taonga tūturu, and currently, or like original, currently it's the Ministry of Culture and Heritage who makes a decision about whether something is like a real taonga. And the tribunal said that's ridiculous, you need to have people who are culturally competent. The Act also uses a definition that something has to be more than 50 years old to have the term antiquity or taonga tūturu associated, and they questioned that as well. With Te Papa, they were very complimentary of their relationship with Māori and the way in which they've made their institution bicultural. But they say that it's time to move into the next step of evolving that partnership. And then they had a lot to say about the Protected Objects Act, where the Crown takes prima facie ownership over anything found. And for those who want to, the tribunal says that for those who want to acquire these items, that Māori kaitiaki should be exempt from having to register as a collector, which is currently what the Act requires. Just my last slide on this. That the overall recommendation was for the establishment of viable partnerships, so new forms of partnership right across education, science, culture and heritage, and that these should be looking at shared decision making. So really saying not just having a conversation, oh yes, there's Māori out there and they do have an interest, something much more proactive. So this is the state we're at in our marriage and in what the tribunal is suggesting we need to do to protect taonga Māori. I'm not going to go into the rest of the chapters because it's off time, and maybe we might have a little time for a few questions. So I hope that this information has been helpful to you in the work that you do for you as New Zealanders, so that you know about Y262, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. But also that maybe I helped you not have to read 1,000 pages. Or maybe I whet your appetite and now you are going to read 1,000 pages. But it's a fascinating report, and you can tell straight away that the tribunal went to a lot of thought and effort into how they constructed their response. So here's hoping the marriage survives and flourishes and the children do well and the chattels remain in the country. Kia ora rā. Sorry? Crown and state. Oh, well, Crown, in terms of the treaty partnership, is government. State is a more generic term for countries, particularly when you're talking at a global level, but they're both government. Nothing? Mm-hmm. No one's jumping up. Oh, no, there's one.
Sorry. I just actually want to say a statement, and that's thank you very much for giving such a balanced, unbiased discussion on what is a very complicated topic. Often what you see coming through the press isn't good for either sides. And I think it's really, really great that we're able to have discussions in places like the LIANZA conference where we can get, well, the right information in a manner where we can all take it back to our own institutions and apply it. Yeah. So thank you very much. It's an excellent presentation.
Thank you. I'll just make a quick comment to that. On the day that the tribunal issued the reports up north to the claimants, I appeared on The Nation with Sean Plunkett, and he was all keen to make this as racially divisive, as controversial as he possibly could, and he kept firing all these questions, and I had already gone in there with a brief to myself to to not allow it to be racially divisive, because we really don't need that as a country. So he'd say things like, well, what about the chapter on rongoa Māori, and they want everybody to have rongoa Māori. Like, isn't that a bad thing? And I said, well, actually, isn't that a good thing? Like, if we can offer even more alternatives for better health care, what's wrong with that? And it sometimes is a challenge when you're dealing with media to turn around the things that they're saying, which are deliberately meant to be antagonistic and divisive, and try and bring it back to just general statements and leave it at that. So thank you for that.
Can you explain more, please, about the situation where rangatira would apply to objects that have been acquired wrongly, and how that might apply? Is that objects that are overseas that need to be repatriated, or is that objects that might be received Crown control in New Zealand at the moment?
Okay. I don't know if everyone heard the question, but it was asking me to clarify a little bit more around the rangatiratanga interest for taonga wrongfully taken. Please be clear that what I presented is just an analysis of what the tribunal has said, so I'm not offering my personal views other than that I disagree with their fundamental statement right at the beginning about Māori ownership. But from my reading of the chapter, they do make this distinction of items wrongfully taken, and it's particularly through the what used to be the Antiquities Act, which was reformed, of course, to become the Protected Objects Act. But in that act, when the Crown took ownership, and a lot of things also went into private hands, there was never any system by which Māori interests were identified. And now there is a system where you have to go through the Māori Land Court to establish your kaitiaki interest in an item. But you might have seen in the news very recently, the people of Gisborne have just had their treasured wharenui returned from Te Papa, repatriated from Te Papa. There are messages that for those taonga that were wrongfully taken and are in collections, they do need to be returned. At the very least, there needs to be discussions with the rightful guardians, and who may well decide to leave it where it is. That has happened in many cases, particularly with regional museums, where we are quite happy to have the items remain there. But discussions do need to happen, and we need to get a better understanding of those that sit in the wrongfully taken camp from those where there's simply a Māori interest.
Tēnā koe Aroha. Wonderful presentation, thank you. It was very, very informative, entertaining, but also highly thought-provoking as well about my place, or our place as colleagues in libraries, about how we provide access to mātauranga Māori or Māori knowledge, how some of us are also kaitiaki on a personal level as well as a legislative level as well. I was quite pleased to see some of the recommendations come through, because many of the libraries here have legislation that govern how they use or provide access to taonga Māori. I was also quite pleased to see that there was the ability there for amendments to be made to things like the Resource Management Act, because some of these institutions have acts of their own. So potentially there's the opportunity there for us to fulfil some of those recommendations in the report. When I saw the mechanism of a commission set up to as a mechanism to monitor some of the uses and purposes of taonga Māori, do you think that there might be an opportunity for one of those commissions to be set up for the libraries and archives and that sort of thing?
Good question. But the commission that was set up for, or the commission the tribunal is asking to be set up, is relating to a very technical legal process about how we receive trademark, copyright, patent applications, and how we consider the kaitiaki interest within those. So there's a legal reason and a commercial reason to have such a body. In the case of libraries, it's probably less of an imperative, but nevertheless you are sitting on collections where people might access information for commercial purposes, and you need to work out how you're going to manage that kind of use. So I think the tribunal's report will be helpful to you, because they do look at how you manage information and resources for people who are wanting to exploit it commercially. So as long as there are within institutions ways of making that distinction, and as the tribunal says, less about access and more about how the information is to be used, I think that would be a very useful thing to do at quite local level in particular. Yes.
Oh, well,
Sorry, can I just give an example of what's just happened in terms of an iwi representative team trying to access their own iwi map with Māori terminology on it. And I just think, and I'm just saying this for the archives information, that while it was given access, and it was great, I think if more questions had been asked as to who was wanting to access, that it was actually Ngāti Hako, and it was actually a representative team of Hauraki, that it was going to be used for their own people, that it might have been able to be accessed a little bit easier. So there's just some process stuff around when we accessed it online. We weren't asked who we were and why we wanted to access it. Thank you.
Sure. I actually sit on Te Pai Whakawairua, which is the Māori Advisory Committee to Archives New Zealand. And I know that within archives there has been a push to support iwi archives, because you often find yourself in situations of having to make decisions like access when you really don't want to, and it's really not your business to, actually. So if we, the more we're able to delegate to iwi the care of their taonga, then the decision rests with them, and rightfully that's where it belongs. But I think this is what the tribunal is saying. We've got to be far more proactive and a little bit more speedy in getting to that stage of having joint management over our taonga works.
Okay, as librarian, public perception says that you've got plenty of time in your libraries to read books. That's how you know every single book in your library, every resource within your library. So 1,000 pages is nothing. I recommend you read it, especially around the Mātauranga Māori information and the taonga that you do hold, that DJ and Aroha have indicated that you hold as kaitiaki within your organisation. Don't forget, you're not married yet. So
No, not divorced
have a
yet.
play around first. Make sure you find the right one and start the relationship and the discussion happening between yourselves and those within your region. Nō reira, he mihi anō kia koe e te whaia. I tō kaha, tō kawhiria koe ngā kōrero pai, ngā kōrero tika mō mātou o te rauherenga o Aotearoa, nō reira tēnā koe. And again, folks, hei ki pakipaki!
Thank you, Aroha. I just found out just before you gave your speech that we're related. So, of course, it was a wonderful speech, the best. And actually, I've got to say, as a person who knows absolutely nothing about what any of the speakers have been talking about since I've been here, I find it very stimulating, actually. I'm a writer and I need to have my head filled up. And just listening to what you had to say, it was... gave me insights about things that I didn't normally think about and made me think about writing things that are divisive. This is what I thought. I'll whip it up into a poem. I'll get the subject of your speech and I'll call it that, but these are just thoughts at the moment. As a Māori, I've never received a penny out of any of the treaty settlements. Furthermore, I've realised, now that I've looked into it, that I'm personally owed $500 million by the government. They've never paid me a penny, and with that in mind, they should all be sent off to debtors' prison. National Party, Labour Party, Greens, the whole lot, you can all go off to Mount Crawford, and you can think about the costs and rewards of broken promises there and talk it over with my mates in prison. I'm owed $500 million, and as I said, with this in mind, I don't see why I should have to pay my $100 parking fine. On the basis of the fact that I'm actually part Te Atiawa, we're the indigenous tribe here, right here. And for some parking warden to come and give me a $100 fine is very rude and tramples all over my rangatiratanga. I shouldn't have to pay a $100 parking fine when Parliament's been parked up down there for 150 years, hasn't paid me a thing. Anyway, so here we go. Once again, before we break for lunch, please try and be reasonably punctual about getting to your sessions on time. Encourage people to view the posters in the foyer of Michael Fowler. Authors of posters will be there from 1:30 to 2:30. Lunch. I think I just said that, I'll say it again. Please remember to visit the exhibition stands in both Renouf Foyer and the Town Hall. Internet cafe located next to Datacom, stand 27. Please refer to your program for your special interest group meeting room. This afternoon there are the workshops and library tours back here for the LIANZA Awards at 2:30. If you are on a library tour, please meet at the front entrance of the Michael Fowler Centre. Thank you.